heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its thorns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, The Lord will provide. And it is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. The word of the Lord.
Our New Testament lesson comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verses 40 through 42. Hear now the word of the Lord. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of the little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. The word of the Lord. The church that I grew up in was Winter Park Presbyterian Church down in the Orlando area. There's a picture of it. It's a large sanctuary and has some very large and very nice stained glass windows. Now, for 12 years, from first grade through my senior year of high school, I sang in the children and youth choir. Now, it might be hard to believe that was before years of coaching and teaching and allergies thrashed my voice, but I used to be able to carry a tune. But the church was so large that they had 3 different choirs, and I progressed through all of them with the different age groups. And every now and then they would have us, when we were little kids, they would have us sing in the worship service. Sometimes I wondered if it was just a way to get the parents to come to church. But we had robes and we had stoles on, and we would march down that long center aisle into the sanctuary. And as we were processing, I'd take a look at all those stained glass windows. And there was one that depicted a scene from today's Old Testament passage. Now, I couldn't find a actual picture of that stained glass window, but this one's pretty similar. It depicted the story of Abraham and Isaac. Now, in that stained glass window, there was Abraham with his knife pulled back, ready to sacrifice his son Isaac. And there was a light coming down on the face of Abraham, and he's looking back at the light. Now, when you're a little kid, that's kind of a terrifying window to look at. And we walk down and we look at that, we kind of whisper to each other, what's that one about? I don't know. And then one of the older kids said, that's in the Bible. We said, if that's in the Bible, what chance do we have? We better behave. Yeah. And indeed, the saga of Abraham and Isaac is quite disturbing. You wonder why it got included in the Bible and why it's looked at as being so important. So let's start by taking a look at why it's so disturbing. First, it's disturbing that God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. Who would ask a parent to do that? And a child that Abraham and his wife, Sarah, had waited so long to have. This week I attended a funeral for the youngest son of a fellow who was the former president of Flagler College. And he saw the grief and the agony on the parent's face, and he thought, why would God ever want to put a parent through that much agony? Is this an evil God? Second, Abraham follows God's message and gets ready to do this without delay. He doesn't stop to ask, hey, is this really God? How does he know it's God? Maybe it's the devil trying to get him to sacrifice his son. And if it is God, why doesn't Abraham say, I'm not going to do that? That's immoral, and I'll have no part of it. Third, the passage starts with God saying that he's going to test Abraham. Is this test immoral? Do you test somebody by asking them to do dangerous things? Would you take a young child and give them a knife from the kitchen and say, hey, go put that in the electrical outlet over there? And then before they do it, say, stop. I was testing to see if you'd listen to me. I mean, if that was the situation today, we'd be calling the Division of Family Services. So is this a test or is this child abuse? But to understand the passage, I think we got to put ourselves in the shoes of Abraham some 2,500 years ago. Being an ancient Jew, you'd be familiar with the teaching that the firstborn belongs to God. Whether it's an ox or a sheep, you were to keep it with its mother for 7 days, and then on the 8th day, you were to return it to God. And this idea was widely held in the Middle East. In fact, the Canaanites took this a step further and sacrificed their own human sons to their god Moloch. The Israelites knew that God didn't want you to do this. So in Exodus, Moses tells the people that animals can be used as a substitute for sacrifices and to use them instead of a human. In the New Testament, after Jesus is born, Mary and Joseph on the 8th day go to the temple and sacrificed 2 turtle doves. That was acknowledging that the firstborn belongs to God. Well, the problem with Abraham is that Abraham came before Moses. So this law of substitution wasn't around yet. Abraham was told to sacrifice his son, and he was prepared to do it. It's not a question about ethics. It was a question of whether Abraham would do something that would be exceptionally difficult and heart-wrenching. Think about what Isaac must have meant to Abraham. He was the son that God had promised to he and Sarah. He was the son that was going to bring faith to generations. Is he to sacrifice the entire future that had been promised to him and the generations to come? It would be the loss of everything for Abraham. And that's why it's a disturbing story. Now, in our own way, though, we face this. Do we trust God when we're faced with the loss of everything? And that's what the passage is really about. Will we trust God? In a world of chaos, in a world with plenty of war and
Linda, could you
a world that lacks justice,
mute your?
facing an impossible future, in a world that doesn't seem to care about us? Will we trust God?
Hold on a minute, let me go in the bed. The bed is too high.
Isaac the son is an interesting part of the saga as well. He goes along with his father, helps build the altar, gets on the altar, asks his father where the lamb is for the sacrifice. Abraham tells him God will provide. Somehow, God will provide. Despite facing the prospect of losing everything, he trusts that God will provide. Isaac shows that he trusts God too. There's no sign of a fight. There's no sign of him questioning his dad. When it comes to the moment, Abraham pulls back the knife, and then a voice calls to Abraham, "Don't do it."
I thought it was up there.
What?
And they see a ram nearby with its horns caught in the bush,
It's on my phone.
and the ram becomes the substitute for the son. Can you imagine the discussion when they got back home? Sarah asking Isaac, "So, how was your time with your father? And I'm saying, oh, it was fine. Dad tied me up and put me on an altar, took out a knife when he was about to sacrifice me, but he didn't. What's for dinner? Abraham, you'll get over here. You've had some explaining to do. Abraham is rewarded for fearing God. Fearing God in this sense meant fully submitting to God's will.
We didn't lower it
Putting
down.
God
to the floor. We just-
over
Right, doesn't
yourself.
have to go to the floor.
God knows that Abraham trusts him above all else. And that was very important because God needs to know. God needs to know because his promise depends on Abraham trusting him. Abraham, will you see this through? Can you trust me no matter what? If not, I need to find somebody else. And after all, Abraham didn't exactly have the greatest of track records up to this point. Not just once, but twice, he passed his wife off as his sister in order to save his own neck. When God told him Sarah would have a baby in her old age, he laughed. He laughed at God. God needed to know. And God got his answer. Abraham would allow God's promises to go further. In the Bible, the story of Abraham comes to a close after this. We don't read about him anymore. It moves on to the next generation of people and their stories. But future generations would look back to this story to renew their faith. The promise that will be fulfilled if we trust that God will provide. So back to the question of why include this disturbing story in the narratives of Abraham and Sarah? What do they contribute to our understanding of God and God's mission in the world? The main theme is the fulfillment of promises that God makes to Abraham and Sarah for a child, for land, and for a blessing. They were to model what a faithful relationship with God looks like, what it means to live out God's will for his creation. They were to show and tell God's love for the whole world, and ultimately to participate in God's redemptive work by being the people through whom the Messiah of the world would come. We all face times and situations that seem hopeless. Times when we're required to have courage and to face something that we'd rather not. But in those times, we can be reminded of Abraham, who was about to lose everything, but who had trust in God. Trusting God in the dark times, especially in the dark times. And that promise that you will be rewarded for your faithfulness. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.